I figured out this trick my third year of tutoring, that there's a magic number that can make them very well-rounded individuals and also get them into the schools. So for verbal and math, that magic number out of 50, if you look at the chart, turns into a 42. Because if you get a 42 in each section, you get a 283. And a 283 in each gets you a 566, which puts you over Stuyvesant. So I want to just talk about how this test is made in that sense. This student who got a perfect score, 50 out of 50, and a 25 out of 50, a 75% got well above the Stuyvesant cutoff. But a student who got a 42 out of 50, a 42 out of 50, or an 84% got in, but not as clearly as this student, even though they're the better or well-rounded student. Does everybody understand that? Okay. That's really important. But it's better to be in this spot rather than that in the long run. Because if you get into the school, right, you're going to have trouble with whatever subject you had already started to have trouble with when we started prepping you. Does everybody understand that? Any questions? So now I'm going to kind of fast forward to what happened this past year and what will happen moving forward. So remember how the new test has 57 questions in each? There's one other part of that that I haven't told you yet. Though the new test, I'm just going to erase this part so I can put the new test stats up. Though the new test will have 57 questions in, the verbal has been renamed the ELA, and 57 in the math, 10 questions in each section are field questions. What that means is whether you get them right or wrong, they will not count. They're not going to be the 10 easiest questions, or they might be. They're not going to be the 10 hardest questions, or they might be. So there is literally no way for you to know. If you're sitting there while taking the test and trying to figure out which one's a field question and which one is not, you're wasting valuable time. So it's better to treat every question as if it counts. In the old model, the magic number for a well-rounded student that would get into Stuyvesant was a 42 out of 50, right? 8 wrong. Remember that 10 of these questions will not count. So you're being graded out of a 47, right? Because 10 questions are not counting. 47 in each section. So I have yet to make a chart. I'm in the works of putting one together so we can start scaling the scores. But that means that you have a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. Keeping all of that in mind, I figured out that in order to reach that Stuyvesant level, and I tried it with my kids last year, and it worked. That's kind of where they ended up being at. The magic number is a 50 in each section. Best case scenario, the 7 you got wrong didn't count. So you got a perfect score. Worst case scenario, right, is all 7 counted that you got wrong, and you got them wrong. So that's a 40 out of 47. A 40 out of 47 is 7 wrong out of 47, whereas the old cutoff was 8 wrong out of 50. So this kind of ensures you into Stuyvesant if you were to get this score. And same exact thing would happen here. So the way I kind of predict my students' trajectory is if you and this is very important, the timeline is very important. This test is a marathon, it's not a sprint. If you stop practicing, you will lose out. And I've seen that time and time out again with different students over the years. If you can consistently achieve this score over the last 4 weeks before the test on at least 6 practice tests, then you're in good shape where I can say you're pretty much guaranteed Stuyvesant. But if you don't do any of those things, or if it's only 5 tests, not 6, it's only in the last 3 weeks, not 4, then I won't say those words. Because consistency, especially near the end of the test, or right before it rather, end of preparation, and right before the test is ridiculously important for this. Any questions? Yes, sir. The objective is to get 50 out of 57. The objective is not to get 50 out of 57 in each section today. That's down the road in September, right? We need to understand the timeline of students preparing. So a lot of the students started at the end of January, or let's say early February, right, for the spring session. February, March, We're in April now. May is when the spring session ends. Then we have June. Of course, we have summer camp in July and August. And of course, we have intensive classes in September and October. October is about half a month. It doesn't really count because the test is in the third week of October. So this is the timeline that I've always followed and I've found success in. You have until June to learn for exposure. Right? For the material. That's when you have until to learn. You have until August to fine-tune any hiccups, any issues you have with any of the topics. And you have September and October to just practice. If you're trying to learn things in September, you're way behind. Right? It's not impossible, but you're way behind. Right? Your chances are a lot slimmer. So that's kind of the timeline to go down. That's what will give you success. Right? Ask all the questions, make all the mistakes. The time is now. Right? In July and August, you're just working, you figured out what's weak, or what's hard for you, what's easy for you, and you're working on things that are weaker to make them stronger. And September and October, you're just taking practice tests. Because near the end, this test just becomes about practice. One of the worst things that I have had past students do is we would take practice tests, even within June, and they would be scoring well above the intended cutoffs for Stuyvesant, right? And I'd be like, if you keep on doing this, you'd be fine. And then they go away for 2 months out of the country. I give them some work, as a tutor, but it's up to them. And when you're away in another country with family, it's hard to be self-motivated, right? So for that reason, they go away, they come back in September, and we take a practice test. And they're barely making it over Brooklyn Tech. We scramble, we work hard for 6 weeks. These are real students I've had. And they missed Stuyvesant by 1 point. Because they went away. And then, this is the other part that a lot of parents and students don't think about. This was a real student who lived in Forest Hills, and she missed Stuyvesant by 1 point, and she got into Bronx Science. Bronx Science, phenomenal school, right? Ecstatic to go there, ready for the challenges there. To go from Forest Hills to Stuyvesant takes 45 minutes each way. So her commute is 1.5 hours. To go from Forest Hills to Bronx Science now is about an hour and a half each way using public transportation, right? So that's 3 hours. She's doubled her commute time. So then this is what a lot of parents don't think about. But Mo, don't worry, we're just going to send her in the yellow bus in the mornings. She'll be there in 30 minutes. It runs, no problem. Say, okay, great. You can do that all of 9th grade. But you know that eventually everything that you do in high school is to put on your resume and sculpt for colleges when you apply to colleges. And she's going to have to join sports teams, possibly swimming where they have early morning practices before the buses don't run. Or she's going to want to do debate. And she's going to stay after and go to tournaments and practice on weekends when the buses don't run. She's going to have to possibly want to be part of a theater production and stay past 5 p.m., which is the last time the buses run. And she'll have to take public transportation eventually, unless you want to hold her back, right? And the commute factors into it. I mean, the student's fine. She's at MIT now, so she did well. Yeah, just that school in Massachusetts. So she's perfectly fine. But she definitely had to work a lot harder, right, to make up for those 3 hours that would be on the commute. Yes, Mo, I can read my book on the train. I went to high school and I took the train. It's hard to do. There's other people pushing you around. It's rush hour. It's not as easy as people think. So thinking of distance is another important thing as well, especially when you rank schools, right? And also think about where your child's likely chances are. And the way you make your chances better is through that practice and not taking long extended gaps. Any questions on the scoring, how the future tests will be scored, what the cutoffs look like? Any questions at all? Okay, great. We can move on to the next 2 pages. So the next page says the bare essentials, how to read. So it may just be the tutor in me. You probably see a blank page, not filled out at all. This is kind of the tutor in me. You know, you put your kids through here for 4 hours, and some of them love it, and at times some of them feel tortured. But we try to keep them happy and, of course, keep them learning. So it's only fair that you get a taste of what we teach them, right? So that's why I have this prepared, and I will be teaching you 2 of the bare necessities in order to succeed on this test. One is how to read. One of my first classes, whenever I teach a class, is literally labeled just like this. Because when someone comes to me and I've never taught them before, especially reading comprehension, in my opinion, they don't know how to read. And we have to kind of go through what they do. So, you know, this is the time to participate, answer questions. And so I'm just going to erase the board and kind of copy down the T-chart. But of course, feel free to write directly on yours, okay? So reading comprehension basically comes down to 2 parts. One is the reading aspect of it, and the other one are the questions, right? The comprehension end of it. So I have taken the Hunter test, the SSAT, the SHSAT, the ISEE, the MCAT, the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT, the LSAT, GRE, GMAT. If there's letters that make a test, I've probably taken it at a certain point. So for that reason alone, right? The one thing that's never left out of any of these standardized tests is reading comprehension. Now, the way you learn how to read in a high school classroom is very different than the way that you're supposed to be reading here. In a good high school classroom where they teach you how to read, you read a book, you come in with questions, highlight, you notice things that happened in previous parts of the story, and also foreshadowing things in the future, right? So those are kind of the things that you look for. You discuss how it relates back to kind of current events and other things going on. In a standardized test, reading doesn't work like that at all. So the first question I'll ask, and I've asked students this, is when you do reading comprehension, do you read the questions first or do you read the passage first? I love how all of you are kind of whispering, embarrassed that if you say the wrong answer, everyone will hear it. What do you think? Just take a guess. You have 2 choices. It's 50-50. I see a lot of parents saying questions, and students, I hear 2 students saying passage. It makes sense that the students are right because they're learning it now. But you definitely always read the passage first, never the questions. And when I say read, I never mean read, and we're going to talk about that in a second. You always skim the passage first. You don't read it. And we're going to talk about the difference between skimming and reading right now. When you read it, you look for the itty-bitty details. Every little sentence matters to you. But when you're skimming, you only care about big picture things, right? So ignore tiny details. Focus on big picture. And you don't read or skim the entire thing at once. You do it paragraph by paragraph. And as you're skimming, you do this thing called annotation, right? You annotate. So what is annotating? It's basically taking notes, right, on what that paragraph was about. And you take it paragraph to paragraph. And the other thing that you do, there's an exception to taking it paragraph to paragraph, right? Unless the paragraph is too long or it's too complex. If as you're skimming, half of the things are just going by you. You have no idea what's going on. 1, you slow down, right? And 2, you break it up. Something that a lot of teachers call chunking, I call segmenting. Any questions so far? Great. Just make sure that when you annotate or you take these notes, they are only for you. So So they only need to make sense to you. And that'll come into play in a little bit. The other thing that you want to do is, as you annotate, remember these two acronyms. DID and KISS. Some of the parents may have heard of KISS before. DID stands for dumb it down, and KISS stands for keep it simple and short. Because whatever you're reading or skimming, that's one of the ways you know to stay on task and focus only on big picture and ignore the tiny details. Dumb it down, right? I always say if you read something and you're able to explain it to a 5-year-old, you're a genius. Right? The real definition for KISS, especially when I work with older kids, is keep it simple, stupid. But I usually don't say that, especially to like 5th graders who I teach for Hunter, because then they're like, ooh, he said the S word. And so we get all riled up, so I avoid that. Right? Any questions so far? Great. The other thing that you want to really keep in mind is perspective. Or point of view, rather. You want to keep point of view in mind because this works especially for nonfiction, but also for fiction. For nonfiction, it's usually one of 3 points of view. The author agrees with something, they're pro something, they're trying to convince you. They're con something, they're trying to convince you otherwise, why something is bad, right? Or it's not that they don't care, but they're just providing you with information, right? It's never they don't care. That's a trap answer. Don't fall for that, right? So it's always one of those 3 for nonfiction. For fiction, perspective and point of view are also important. You need to know if it's first person, second person, or third person. Who's the narrator? Is it someone reliable? Is it an omnipotent narrator who's seeing everything from, from up above, right? So those are very important to understand where the story is going, especially for fiction. The other thing that you want to do, and this is one of the key things of why we don't read the questions first, because when you read questions first, you only care about answering the questions. And if it's a complicated question, or if it's a question whose answer is hidden in the passage, you'll miss it. If it's implied, you'll miss it. And you'll get one of the easiest questions wrong, which is the main idea question. That's why we don't focus on the questions first. But we do something in order to kind of combat that as well. Imagine you're in class, right? Your teacher keeps on mentioning this certain aspect of, let's say, this moment in history. They keep on mentioning it over and over and over again. Your test is in a week. They keep on mentioning it even more that week. What do you think is going to be on the test? What she's saying over and over again, right? That's exactly how this works. If you see the author mentioning something over and over again, what I want you to do as a tutor is get used to predicting questions because you already know the answer to them, because you've read them in the passage already. So one of the key things to do here is predict. Predict answers and questions. And that's kind of it. If you're able to do this well, you can take care of any reading comprehension passage. It works for fiction, nonfiction. It works for the Common Core in 4th grade, and it works for the LSAT. The only thing that changes in reading comprehension from level to level is complexity of language and complexity of passage type. You have more variety, right? That's the only 2 things that change. Otherwise, reading comprehension is a pillar that stays the same throughout all standardized tests. Any questions? Great. It's great to theorize and talk about how you should do things. It's another to actually show you. So if everyone doesn't mind just switching to the next page, because now we're going to do a passage together. I'm sure none of you expected to be reading tonight. I'm sorry. But we need to use our brains, each and every one of us. So I'm going to show you how I do it, and then and this is kind of like the ideal for when your student gets used to doing it this way. So this part that I'm going to write on this end is not meant for questions. This is the example that I'm using from the passage. Feel free to write on the passage directly. Feel free to write on the passage directly, not on the chart. So if I look at the passage, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs. So I'm just going to number my paragraphs. But if I were to do it on the test, the way I would do it is on the margins of each paragraph, right? So I expect everyone to be writing this next to each paragraph. One of the things I did in high school was join debate, not because I like it, but because they had a skill that I needed. So if you ever join debate, or if any of you have ever done debate, they have to read really quickly, analyze really quickly, and repeat really quickly, whatever they want to say, like their rebuttals. So I joined it for literally half the year to just learn that skill, and then I left. So I learned how to read or slash skim really quickly. The eruption of the Philippine mountain, blah, 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 and I can read all that and understand it. I don't want students to read at my speed because they will miss things, so I slow down for them. So I'll do the same thing. But remember, when you're skimming, you're not taking in every single word, only the important factual things in each paragraph. So for example, as I'm reading this, the eruption of the Philippine mountain, Mount P, in June 1991 sent a huge cloud of gas and dust encircling the globe. The dust and ash from Mount P was blamed for a 2-year decrease in global temperature, changes in weather patterns, and damage to the ozone layer. The situation brings to mind a meteorological event that occurred 175 years earlier. At that time, harsh weather conditions plagued much of eastern North America and to a lesser extent, northern Europe. Stop, look, put it down, don't look at it. That's exactly the way I teach. Whatever you remember is what's important, because your brain naturally goes towards things that are important. You probably all noticed that I didn't actually pronounce the whole word for the name of the mountain, or the mount, or the volcano. That's because they're going to give you long, useless words that you don't need to struggle pronouncing, and you'll waste time if you try to do that. So I just, notate it as Mount P, right? So basically what happened, there was this mountain this volcano in the Philippines. It erupted and caused weather changes. That's the main idea, right? And I don't need to look back, because if I do, then that's a little tiny detail. So for example, remember how I said the notes are only for you and for no one else? This is exactly how I take notes. There was a volcano. It erupted. Weather turned crazy. And that makes perfect sense to me. And when someone sees this on my test, right, on this paper, do you know what they will think? Nothing, because they never see this paper. As soon as you're done with it, this gets recycled, or at least that's what the DOE says, right? So, because they only care about your Scantron, they only care about the multiple choice answers. And no one looks at this except for you. So for me, that's sufficient enough. If it isn't for you, write the full sentence. Everyone starts to create their own language the better they become at annotating. It's not something you tap into overnight. Again, like most things in this test, it takes practice. Any questions on that so far? Great. So if we move on to the second paragraph, I take one look at it, and I can already kind of tell it's really long. So what I'm going to do before I even start skimming it is I'm going to break it up into two. Remember the rule? We annotate paragraph to paragraph unless the paragraph is too long or too complex. This doesn't seem like a complicated passage to me, but I know that this paragraph is long. So I already think of a place to stop. I look at line 25. I mark it off. That's where I'll stop for the first part. April 1816 brought typical spring weather to upstate New York and New England. Trees budded and farmers prepared to plow and plant. In May, however, the expected warm temperatures failed to arrive. Most people remained optimistic, waiting for the summer that was just around the corner. They waited in vain. June ushered in what modern meteorologists call the year without a summer. During the first week of June, 10 inches of snow fell on New England. Throughout the month, temperatures rarely rose above the 30s. Stop, put it down, look up, right? The same kind of thing that we've been practicing. What happened? No summer. And farmers were confused. There was no summer and farmers were confused. That's all I got. I keep on reading. Many farmers replanted crops several times only to see them stunted or destroyed by sleet, hail, and icy winds. July and August brought little improvement. During most days, the temperatures stayed in the 40s. Farmers' diaries document the farmers' daily struggles with near freezing temperatures, failing crops, and dying farm animals. The few crops that managed to survive were killed by frost in mid-September. Winter came early in New England and was unusually severe. Even the South was affected. On July 4th, the high temperature for Savannah, Georgia was only 46 degrees. Again, you see that a lot of things are being repeated. Hopefully everyone's caught on. It's cold. That's like one of the first things that you get. So cold, no crops, and farmers are sad. That's it. Those are my notes. If you look at any of the packets that I do before going into class, that's literally what it looks like. Because that to me makes perfect sense. And when I explain it to students, I just need to be able to translate what does this mean in words, and they can write it out in words, right? Why would I rather write this than words? To save time. It's a time test. Every second counts. A second saved is a second you could use on a harder question that you should get right if you were just given a little bit more time. Any questions so far? Great. So we move on to the next paragraph after that. Some religious leaders warned their congregations that the unusual weather meant that the end of the world was drawing near. Other leaders attributed the cool weather to unusual sunspot activity. The proliferation of the newly invented lightning rod was also blamed. Some people believed that lightning rods had interrupted the natural temperature balance of Earth, causing the cooler temperatures. So these were just what the people thought, right? So what people thought caused it. So for me, I just remember some of them off the top of my head. End of world. Someone else thought it was because of the sunspots. And another person blamed the lightning rods. But these were all their explanations. Any questions so far? Great. We move on to paragraph 4. When you start skimming and annotating, over time it becomes quicker. Reading doesn't feel like a chore, right? You read, you annotate, you move on. You're not stuck on the tiny details. You're not stuck trying to pronounce that word. It was not until October that the first plausible explanation for the year without a summer was suggested. A German astronomer, FB, reported seeing thick clouds of dust in the upper atmosphere. He theorized that these dust particles screened portions of Earth from the warming rays of the sun. It was discovered that in April 1815, Mount T, an Indonesian volcano, had erupted with such force that it had sent an estimated 100 cubic miles of fine dust into the atmosphere. Witnesses to the eruption reported that the sky remained dark for 2 days. The dust then rose high into the stratosphere, where it encircled the world for several years to come. So this is a possible explanation made by some German scientist. I didn't even really catch his name. Does everybody understand? And he thought that a volcano somewhere else affected the weather there. So German scientist, another random volcano caused the cold weather. That's his theory. And we're now at the last paragraph, and it really doesn't feel that long. The last paragraph is, skeptics in 1816 doubted that a faraway volcano could steal their summer. However, most present-day researchers believe Bessel's explanation to be generally correct, demonstrating the global nature of weather. The dust in the atmosphere eventually settled, and the spring of 1817 was back to normal. So there are 3 things I noticed that are important. 1, at the time, he was labeled crazy. Now, we think he's right. And last, there was that term that caught my eye. And if it does, as a reader, once you practice this, it's like a gut feeling, right? That's where you learn how to predict. Global nature of weather. That's kind of the main idea, right? Something happens somewhere can affect weather somewhere else. That's kind of the main idea. It's brought together then. It seems like a conclusion. It makes sense. So the 3 things I'll write down. 1, then, German guy was crazy. Now, German guy was right. And weather is globally affected. So remember how I said I plan to make my way into the medical field? So they say that doctors have the worst handwritings, and I like to overachieve, so I've gotten a head start at it. So feel free to let me know if you can't read something. I will never feel like shy about it or embarrassed or anything. I know my weaknesses. So if there's anyone who's confused by anything, I'll repeat it again. Then the German scientist was crazy. Now German scientist is correct. Weather is globally affected. Okay. Now remember how I said we never read, right? We only skim and we annotate. Here are the reasons why. Because what's coming up next are the questions. And when you do the questions, there's a few things you need to keep in mind. No matter what kind of question you're given, they're all done the same way. That's important. The process of getting a question right is the same regardless of what type of question it is. That's key. The second thing is you're going to look towards this a lot to help you navigate the passage. Okay. Would everyone mind just going back to the T-chart with the questions and reading? What we're going to do now is fill out the theory behind the questions and how to do them. So I'm just going to move it. I'm going to keep this here because we'll need this to answer the questions. And I'm just going to move and write everything else for the questions on this side. I'm going to erase this part of it. Is everyone okay with me erasing this part? Okay. So before we get into the questions on this practice passage, let's talk about what types of questions show up. Students or parents, feel free. Just you can shout them out. What do you see? I heard something. Main idea. Yeah, that's usually the first question, and it's usually, in my opinion, the easiest question. Because if you think about it, this is really what the main idea is. This is what it boils down to. You read something, and then they ask you, what did you just read? So there's no excuse for getting that wrong, right? So main idea. What else? What other types of questions do we have? Most likely, okay. So those fall under the inference, right? What else? Yeah, go ahead. Details. Okay, so I call them vocabulary in context. The in context part is very important. English as a language is complex and has tons of exceptions. So a single word can have multiple meanings. That's why context is so important. Anything else? So I'll help out. There's the author questions, right? So that's author's purpose, mood, tone, etc. There are a special type of detail questions known as line number questions. We'll talk about those in a second. And last but not least, these are kind of the 7 categories I have. The do not/except questions. Which of the following, all of the following were in the passage except for. Which of the following was not mentioned in the passage? Those kind of questions. So not/except questions. Those are kind of the 7 categories I put questions in. And of course, there can be combinations of things, right? What did the author mean, right? Or what was the author most likely trying to say when they said this in line 7 through 10, right? So that's like a combination of 3 types. The good news is, no matter how many different types of questions there are, they're all done in the same exact manner. Every answer you picked all of these questions, every answer you pick, right? They must be answered using passage-based evidence, even if they're an inference question. Because you look towards the passage to make your decisions of what's most likely to happen. Any questions so far? Okay, great. There are, of course, a few other extra tricks to do these things with. For example, this is the way I do and I teach main idea questions. Do you know who's your worst enemy in reading comprehension? Anyone? Does anyone know who their worst enemy in reading comprehension is? Yourself. Yeah. How many times has this happened to someone in this room? Oh, I think the answer is C, but you know what? B sounds good too. And then you circle B, and then you go back and forth, and you finally land on B, and the right answer was C all along. What you said first, right? That's happened to everyone in this room, me included. So you need to get over this thing called doubt, or have confidence. And the way you do that is by using passage-based evidence. If you have an answer C, right, and you have evidence for it from the passage, that doubt shrinks and confidence grows, right? And that helps you stay on the right track. All of these things that I'm telling you are habits to learn in reading comprehension, not just for this test, but for every test in the future. Habits, whether they're good or bad, are hard to break, right? One of my worst habits, I like cracking my neck. It's bad for you, right? So like I'll just like be fidgeting and all of a sudden I'll do that and then that's not good. So it's always better to, create good habits, right? Because breaking habits are hard. That's one of the things why I say that at a certain point, when you learn something new, it's often met with resistance because it's a change. So students are not going to be used to this or happy about this if they haven't been doing this already, right? So once you make the change, right, you're not going to see progress right away. But give it time and give it a chance, and I guarantee you, you will. It hasn't failed me yet on any theory. So that's very important that I want to get across. Your worst enemy in reading is you, especially the part of you that doubts yourself, right? So for main idea, because it's one of the easiest questions that people get wrong, how do you fix that doubt? Well, what you do is this. The answer choices are there to confuse you. Everybody with me? So what I do is I read the main idea question and I cover the answers. And I say what the main idea is in my own words and I go looking for the right answer. And 9 out of 10 times, it's there and it works. Does everybody understand that? Well, what about that 1 out of 10 time, Mo, right? Because you always feel like you're that 1 out of 10 time. So the way to best do that or to kind of help alleviate that kind of issue if it ever comes up is this. If that issue comes up, that means that your answer 1 isn't there, right? And the second thing is they have 4 answers that are bad. Now you have to choose the one that sucks the least, right? And the best and only way to do that is to implement PO, process of elimination. Everybody with me? Any questions? Great. So that's the trick for main idea, that extra trick. Cover the answer choices and say what the right answer is in your own words. For line number questions, if they told you that this was mentioned in line 7 through 9, the trick is they told you where to look. Because one of the hardest things to do is figuring out where to go back in the passage and to find where to look or kind of hone in on where I'm going to find the evidence. Well, if they told you line 7 through 9, you're going to go 5 lines before and 5 lines after. So lines 2 through 14. That's where the evidence is going to be. Everybody with me? So that's the trick for line number questions. For vocabulary and context, you read the sentence before the word is contained in, you read the sentence that the word is contained in, and you read the sentence after the word in question is contained in. So you read 3 sentences, and that gives you enough to do vocabulary and context confidently. So it lets you zone in on where you're supposed to be looking for evidence. Last but not least, not/except questions are solely process of elimination. So in a not/except question, right, you have 4 answer choices. How many of them are right? 1. That means that 3 of them were not in the passage or not mentioned. So let's say that your correct answer is C. Well, that would mean that A, B, and D are in the passage. And the only way you can get C is by saying, oh, this was mentioned in lines 7 through 10, this was mentioned in lines 12 through 15, and this was in line 23 to 25. And that's the only way to do the not/except question. Anyone have any concerns? Any questions on how we're supposed to be following through or tackling the reading comprehension questions themselves? Yeah. Okay. So the question goes like this. All the following are mentioned in the passage except which one, right? So you have 4 answer choices, right? How many of them are right? 1. That means 3 of them are wrong. So this one was not mentioned and these 3 were. So the only way you can get to this answer is if you can find me where this was mentioned, where this was mentioned, and where this was mentioned. So that's why it's always going to be process of elimination with those. Any questions on how to tackle those? Okay, great. One of the other things in reading comprehension that's very different from real world, and a lot of students get these wrong, is following a chain of events. For example, if A results to B and B results to C, And the question is, what caused C? In the real world, we always try to find the root of a problem. We'll say it was A. In reading comprehension, that is not the case. You always go direct. Remember that phrase, always go direct. You go back and you say B is the thing that caused C. And that's always held true for any kind of reading comprehension question. This is the most commonly picked wrong answer, that A caused C. We're going to see one of those questions on the next page. That's why I want to kind of give everyone a heads up on that. Okay? Does anyone have any questions on how we're going to tackle these? I'm just going to go back to building that confidence and lowering that doubt for a second. This is something that I've always done in order to help myself decrease doubt and increase my confidence. And it's always helped me keep this in mind, answering using passage-based evidence. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and erase this. Is that okay with everyone? Yes? Okay. No problem. So this has become second nature to me. Like I can't not do a reading comprehension passage without it. Because again, it's all about building habits, right? I'm answering question number 23. The answer is C, and I found my evidence right here. So this is at times a little extra or a little over the top, but I still do it. You can do one of the two and that's fine. So if the answer to number 23 is C, right, this is just a random example. It has nothing to do with the passage we just read, right? If the answer to number 23 is C, and I found it here, next to these lines, I write number 23. That indicates that's where I got my evidence. But I also do this. Those were lines 7 through 10. I do it there too. I'll tell you why I do this. Mo, doesn't it take extra time to write those things down? Isn't that a waste of time? Didn't you say we're here trying to save time? What's going on? So, what's happening here is this. Say you have 10 minutes left after you've completed the whole test. You started checking things over, especially questions you had trouble with. You're now down to 3 minutes. You have 2 passages left that you'd like to check. Do you have enough time to do them over? No. You could just do one of them over, maybe. Or what you could do is what I usually do. I go to question 23, I see C, and I see the lines. And I just read the lines over and see if C still makes sense. And if it does, I move on. That's a quick check. So it provides me with 2 things. This is useful for 2 reasons. 1, it lowers doubt, builds my confidence that I have the right answer. And 2, it's a quick check on a time test. And it's become second nature because I do it this way all the time. I know some of my students get lazy, so I let them get away with this. Okay, Mo, I don't know the exact line numbers, but it was paragraph 1. And that's fine, because at least you know where to look. Does everybody understand that? Any questions? When we're answering the question, something else that I haven't talked about yet, but that's going to be helpful, are your annotations. Because your annotations are going to direct you where to look for the evidence to this question. So you don't have to re-skim or reread the whole thing. Okay? Any questions before we move on to an example? Okay, great. So I'm just going to number them here. Okay. So we're just going to go through the questions now. 21, which of the following best tells what this passage is about? So we read the choices, right? Yes? No, we don't. I'm trying to see who's awake. So remember, it's a main idea question. So what do we do instinctively? We cover the answer choices, and we look for, in our own words, what's the right answer. So if I were to cover the answer choices, what is the main topic of this passage we just read? Weather is globally affected. Remember that last thing we wrote in that last paragraph? Weather in one place affects weather in other places. We're looking for that answer. Now you can all kind of look through it, right? And remember, what was the example that they used? This weird summer where it was cold, right? Look through all the choices. What's the best answer there? Anyone? B. Yeah, there you go. And the nice thing about main idea questions is you don't have to use the passage-based evidence for them because they're spread throughout the passage. They're all throughout your annotations. Number 22, what is the most likely reason farmers persisted in replanting their crops? So right after reading the question, I don't look at the choices. I look at my annotations. Where do I see the word crops? In paragraph 2, farmers confused, there was no summer, and then farmers were sad because it was cold and there were no crops. So I go back to paragraph 2, and for the first time, I scan and I try to read. I don't just try to skim, I scan for the word crops and farmers, and I try to read. So I see it here in line 25. Many farmers replanted crops several times only to see them stunted or destroyed by sleet, hail, and icy winds. July and August brought little improvement, right? That's the first thing that I see. Another place where I saw that is 17, line 17 through 19. Most people remained optimistic, waiting for the summer that was just around the corner, right? So that tells me, and I haven't even looked at the answers yet, that tells me that people kept on replanting crops because they didn't expect the summer to be this cold for this long, right? They expected crops to grow. So right away, I'm writing down 17 to 19, basically the places where I got my evidence from, and 25 to 27. Before I even look at the choices, because I know that's where the answer is going to come from. What's the right answer for number 22? E. Reading comprehension is easy. We make it complicated, right? Number 23. In the winter that followed the summer of 1816, New Englanders most likely experienced what? Well, again, it's going back to paragraph 2. They experienced what? They experienced cold in the summer and they were confused, right? So they experienced something they didn't expect. They experienced a shortage of crops, right, because there were no crops. These are kind of me predicting things. Remember how we said we predict questions and answers? That doesn't stop with just the reading aspect of it. It continues on as we do the questions. So for number 23, what's the right answer? C. Does anyone know, and this is a practice that I follow with my students. I always talk to my students about what do you think is the most common wrong answer? Why? Because then you know how the test makers are tricking you and you can avoid it. So what's the most common wrong answer that people, well, what did a lot of other people think? A, good, right? That's how we catch on. So why is A wrong? New weather events that they had not encountered before. Well, A would be wrong because did they ever experience cold before? Yeah, there's this thing called winter. We've had it for too long in New York as well. So for that reason alone, right, A is not right. They just didn't expect the cold to be that long and in the summer, right? So again, those miniature words within an answer make a huge difference. So A is the most common wrong answer, but for sure, number 23 is C, and it was found in paragraph 2. Does everybody understand that? Okay. Number 24. Which of the following is implied by the phrase the global nature of weather? Remember that gut feeling I said I was having? That this was going to be a question? It's one of those things, right? Where after working through, you're like, okay, this is kind of like a main idea. This is the point they're trying to get through to us using these examples. They're trying to show that things happening in one part of the world can affect weather in other parts of the world. So what's the right answer for number 24? H. And I know where I found it because I wrote it down. That's paragraph 5. Any questions? Number 25. The author includes the details about the eruption of Mount T in lines 57 to 65 in order to do what? So the first thing I do right away is understand that this is a combination. It's an author question and it's also a line question. They gave me lines 57 to 65, so I know where to look. I start from line 52 and I end at 65. Why don't I go past 65? Can anyone tell me? Why won't it be past 65? Because previously I had said that you go 5 lines after. That's the right answer. It'll be a different paragraph, new topic, right? Remember, these are well-written, real passages that they use. So you can always rely on that. New paragraph, new topic. There's no point in reading the next 5 lines because the answer won't be there because it's a new paragraph. So I know that to go from lines 52 to 65, and that's where I'm going to find the answer. So we're going to read. For the first time, we're going to read, not skim. Starting from line 52. A German astronomer, Frederick Bessel, reported seeing thick clouds of dust in the upper atmosphere. He theorized that these dust particles screened portions of Earth from the warming rays of the sun. It was discovered that in April 1815, Mount Tambora, so they mentioned the mountain. Right away I start underlining. For the first time I underline. An Indonesian volcano had erupted with such force that it had sent an estimated 100 cubic miles of fine dust into the atmosphere. Witnesses to the eruption reported that the sky remained dark for 2 days. The dust then rose high into the stratosphere where it encircled the world for several years to come. So, why did they mention this? Because for him, it was a possibility to explain the cold summer, and it was to explain how this mountain erupting caused the dust, and the dust blocked the sun, which caused the cold. So remember how I said always go direct? So keep that in mind. So is the answer A, emphasize that the aftermath of an eruption still affects the environment today? No, you can cross that out. I truly believe in having a pen in your hand and crossing out wrong choices at all times, so they don't kind of seep into your mind later on and give you that bit of doubt. Highlight the severe impact that the eruption had on the atmosphere. It's not the answer I would go with right away, but I'm going to keep it because it's not wrong technically. Provide details about what happens during a volcanic eruption. No, they didn't give us details. Not at all. Right? They told us the after effects of it, so C is wrong. Suggest that weather events around the world caused the eruption. It's actually the other way around because they said the eruption is possibly what caused other weather events. So D is wrong. D is the most commonly picked wrong answer for that reason because people get it twisted, right? So the correct answer by process of elimination is B. And we still use the same lines that I talked about before. And next to this, I write POE. That way I remember that I utilize process of elimination. So that when I check it, I remember that these lines might not just be enough. I need to use process of elimination as well. Next, number 26. The cold summer of 1816 was most likely caused by what? That answer is also found in 52 to 67. 65, rather, sorry. The reason why is because in that short amount, they told us that the volcano erupted. That led to dust blocking the sun's rays, right? And that's what then led to the cold. Remember how I said always go direct? Was it the volcano that caused the cold weather? No, it wasn't. It was the dust particles, right? So what's the answer to number 26? It's got to be H. What do you think the most common wrong answer is? It's usually G. The reason why is because that's one of the things they labeled as the volcano doing, right? It stayed in the stratosphere. So the answer is H for the same lines that we used before. Last but not least, number 27, how does the third paragraph contribute to the passage? So now you kind of go back. Well, for this one, I don't really need to go back because my summary of the third paragraph is so good. The third paragraph was possible explanations of what people thought caused it. End of the world, sunspots, lightning rods. It's what people thought back then. So the answer to number 27 is B, and that's paragraph 3. Any questions? So people are probably asking, Mo, is it really that easy? Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, never. So when the tests get made, because I'm always curious about how things happen and why they happen, the test that they're going to take has been in the works since almost last May. And then they go through so many rounds of checking. They have the final version basically ready to go by midsummer. So, it's not, I don't think ever in the history they've ever had like an error on the test. So I just want to kind of recap. What a lot of people think is after doing this, Mo, is it really that easy? This is actually a sample question from the DOE. It's from one of their booklets. This is a real passage that I took from them, and these are questions that they provided. So it's not like I made these questions up or I made this passage up to work towards my methods. It's just that the methods work regardless of what you have, right? Would I say this is a difficult passage? No. Would I say it's an easy one? If it was an easy one, you would get everything right, and there would be no wrong answers. But there were two questions that trip a lot of people up. So I would say this is a mid-level passage, right? And if you can apply it to mid-level passages to get everything right, the hard ones don't seem as hard, and the easy ones are, of course, a walk in the park. Any questions on how to read? You are all reading certified. Okay, so now that we've done that, right, the other part of the test, equally as important, is math. Now, let me just erase the board so I can talk to you all about how the math section goes for a few minutes. So the math has topics learned in 6th, 7th, 8th, and in some high schools, 9th grade. That being said, it is impossible to expect any 7th grader with just their common knowledge of math in their school, just a regular public school, to be ready for this test, right? They may know about possibly, in the entire math section, 80% of the material. And that's if they're a very good student in their math class. The other 20% needs to come from kind of external learning or catching up with different topics. For that reason, the way we do it in my classrooms, I teach in Queller, Manhattan on Saturdays and Sundays, right? The way it's done in my classroom is we go through, like for example, my entire class, every single week, we do math lessons. We learn material, I give them practice problems, we learn material, I give them practice problems. Right, and I have, for example, my class will have taken 3 tests as opposed to 4, as many of the other students. Because rather than trying to, diagnose where they are now, it makes more sense to learn. This is the learning phase, right? So everything I do for a reason. If you ever have a question, ask me. I find order in my own disorder, so there's always a reason behind things. It is impossible right now to list all the math topics that will be tested, right? There's definitely a list, but every year it changes. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. When I say it changes, I don't mean the list of math topics, but like how often something will come up, right? What percentage of the math test will be percents, or what percentage will be rate, time, distance, right? All of those things change year to year, but the topics kind of stay the same, so we know which topics to teach. The other thing is that there are different versions of the test, and we'll talk about that as one of the last things. But what I want to teach you is basically something basic that the test requires, especially from the math section. Okay, yeah, let me go back. So I give you the bare essentials that you need to solve this problem that I've given you, right? By the way, for the 12 years that I've been tutoring, I ask my students to do a few things for me after the test. I tell them, can you come back and give me 2 to 3 questions that you had trouble with? Either math or ELA, right? And from that, over the course of years and over tutoring literally thousands of students, I've gathered like a bank of questions that have nearly been on the SHSAT. The one on the bottom of this page has been on the SHSAT before. It was not a free response like the way I left it, but it was multiple choice. I don't believe in, just going through multiple choice answers and going through the choices. I believe that you should know how to do the math and you should learn how to do it rather than counting on, oh, Mo, when in doubt, what answer should I guess? Is C the best answer to guess? Someone told me that. I don't know who's been going around telling you all this rumor. You have the same chance of guessing from A, B, C, and D. The test doesn't prefer one letter over the other, right? So that's not how it works. So this question, yeah, if you don't mind scrolling down, thanks. So the knowledge that you need, no, you could go up back to the figure. Yeah, thanks. So the question, the knowledge, I know some of you may be rusty in math, right? The knowledge you need to do this question is provided for you on top. The formulas are there. The question is, area of a rectangle ABCD is 48 square units. E, F, and G are the midpoints, right? E and F are the midpoints of BC and AD respectively. EC has a length of 2 units. Semicircle AGD is within the rectangle, and G is the midpoint of arc, while F is the center of the semicircle. What is the area of the shaded region? By the way, the drawing was not on the test. That is courtesy of moi. I am not the best artist in the world, so I apologize if it's not drawn to scale. The other thing I always tell students is never ever assume any object is drawn to scale, even if they say so. Because even if it were, it would not help you. Because the test doesn't allow you to use protractors, compasses, or even rulers, right? So go by what you can definitely, say from the question asked, right? So let me just redraw the image. And the first thing I tell my students is what I learned something in 5th grade. Math. And I've used this until my 3rd year of college, when I took my last math class ever. Math is all about organization. If you can learn how to organize information, right, you can solve any math problem. And it's usually a 3-step method. Step 1, and this is kind of how you avoid silly mistakes. How many of you have done this in a math question? You did all this complicated math, you found out what x is, but the question was, what's 3x? And you got it wrong because you just forgot to multiply by 3. That's happened to almost every person in this room. So the first thing I always ask is, what's the question, right? What's it asking for, right? That's the first step. Number 2, what do I know? That's both from the problem and prior knowledge. What are the shapes here? I see a rectangle. I see a semicircle. This thing kind of looks like a triangle, but not really, right? So, and I know the formulas for all of those. They're not going to be provided for you. What else do I know? I know that the area of this rectangle is 48. I know that this unit right here is 2. And if it's the midpoint, this is also 2. Now, if this side is 4, and I know that the area of a rectangle is length times width, I know that 4 times 12 gives me 48. Those are all the things I know, right? The problem, I figured that part out. Number 3 might be the most important one. And for people who say the STEM field doesn't have creativity, I disagree. To solve these kind of questions, you need to get a little creative, right? Now you plan how you're going to go from what you know to what you need to know, or what you need to find out. Everybody okay with this so far? Great. So before we do any math, I tell my students, organize, right? Plan. Don't waste time with the computation, with the arithmetic. If you have no plan, one of the worst answers I get is this. And this is my voice of a student who doesn't know what they're doing. Mo, is this like 24 pi? And then I would tell the student, how did you get that answer? Because I always wonder about the how and why. Well, there's a 48 and a 2, so I like divided. And then like, there's a circle, so I just threw in a pi. And the funny thing is, 24 pi was probably one of the choices for that exact reason. Because they know students would get frustrated and just go with that, right? So you make a plan. This is an irregular shape. Does everybody agree? Do you have a formula to figure out that shape? Will I teach it to you? No, because it's nonsensical and it won't help you on the test. What will help you is chipping away to find that area. So this is a golden rule. Area of whole minus area of unshaded equals area shaded. Let's write it down. Area shaded is equal to area of whole minus area unshaded. So what we have to do is take this whole image and chip away the unshaded parts. Can everyone see, by the way? Okay, great. So this is the first thing that I'm going to do. One is, the area of the whole is the rectangle. Does everybody agree with that? That's the largest shape here. So I'm going to take the area of the rectangle, and I'm going to subtract the semicircle. minus area of semicircle. And what am I left with? This shape, right? And I tell my students, whenever you see the word midpoint, think of symmetry. So right away, a lot of my students started doing this. What's the shape that they created? A triangle. So if you get rid of the triangle from what's left over, you have these two parts that are symmetrical and equal. So then if you divide by 2, you'll find the area of the thing that we want. Does everybody understand? We haven't even touched math yet. We're not multiplying, dividing, anything. We're just making a plan. Does everyone understand? Any questions so far? Did I lose anyone? Okay, great. So now we go through the math of it all. The area of the rectangle, well, that's given to us. That's just 48. Really easy. Well, the area of a circle, and this is why I gave all those formulas to you all in the top. Area of a circle is pi r squared. So area of a semicircle is going to be half of pi r squared. We know that the radius is 2, right? So half of 2 squared pi is 4 pi. Half of that would be 2 pi. Once we have that, we've completed the thing in brackets. Now we're going to subtract the area of the triangle. Well, for the triangle, we know that the base is 4. And the question is, what is this height? Well, this entire region is 12. But remember, this is also a radius, and it's 2. So the height is 10. So we found the height. And we know that the area of a triangle is base times height divided by 2. Or in this case, 4 times 10 divided by 2. 4 times 10 divided by 2 is 40 divided by 2, or 20. So I'm going to subtract 20 from this. And once I simplify that, all I have to do is divide by 2. So once I simplify this, 48 minus 20 is 28. The minus 2 pi stays. I divide by 2, and I get 14 minus pi. And that was the answer. Any questions? Is this a difficult question? Yes. But is this an impossible question? No. And this is a very common SHSAT hard question. Why? What's hard about it? The hard part is not, do you know the circle? Do you know the rectangle? Do you know the triangle? The hard part is, do you know how to be creative? Right? Do you know how to follow those 3 steps? Because what most students do is they see this problem and they freeze. But if you know those are the 3 steps that'll get me somewhere, then you know at least where to start. And I always start with a plan rather than just random numbers. And that makes all the difference. Does everybody understand? For most students, once we learn how to read, the hardest part is the math. And the reason is not their fault. It's because their school hasn't covered all the material. And even if they have covered some of the material, most students here, even before I walked in, probably knew the area of a circle, rectangle, triangle, so on and so forth. But what they didn't know is how to incorporate their knowledge into a problem they've never seen before. And that's one of our goals as part of the Queller team and as tutors. Does anyone have any questions on this problem? There are other ways to do it, but in my opinion, this has always been the simplest one to explain. Yes? Yep. Make a trapezoid, get rid of this, and then do it. Yeah, and then use the triangle. Any questions? Okay, great. I'll wait until the photo shoot is over. Okay. The next part that I'm going to discuss, I left notes just on the next page just for this alone. And boy, is it a doozy. A lot of parents will not be happy with what I say. I'm only disseminating information. So I'll start with that. I usually don't like discussing this in front of students. I try not to. This is just another thing they worry about. I try to let them not worry, right? Focus on just learning for now. but I just want to be completely honest, and at least the more information you know, the better. Am I okay to erase all of this? Yep. So, for the SHSAT, you take it at the you take it in the borough that your school is in. So for example, though I lived in Queens, I went to middle school in Hunter because it starts from 7th grade. And when you're in 8th grade taking the test, my school was in Manhattan. So I took this test at Stuyvesant. So when I took the test at Stuyvesant, I talked to other students who've taken it in the past. My brother took it at some different location because he went to school in Queens. The setup is pretty much the same. There's a certain number of students. They're seated in single people desks, right? Single person desks. Here's one, here's two, three. And we can imagine, for all intents and purposes, that's how it goes, right? There's a few more, but let's worry about the person in the center, right? I mentioned earlier that there are different tests, right? So there are usually 10 versions of the test. What do I mean by versions? I'll start off with this. Let's say, for all intents and purposes, the 10 versions are given these form numbers or form letters: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, right? The first three, A, B, C, are a little bit easier. The middle four are a little bit harder, and the last three are the hard tests. What do I mean by hard, easy, and medium? There's a difference of 5 questions. Not in number, but in terms of difficulty. Right? So 5 questions on the hard test are a little bit harder than the ones on the medium, and 5 questions are a little bit harder on the medium than they are on the easy version of the test. What's changed between them? There's different passages. Usually one passage is different in each one. That's special to that one. There are different math questions, different numbers, and they change day to day as well. Last year, some of my, no, not last year, 2 years ago, my students from color who took the test on Saturday said that their test had little to no geometry. And then all the students who took it on Sunday were like, it was like almost all geometry. So even day to day, there's different versions of the test, right? So this is the way it's done. The proctor has no idea, by the way, because they might be a school teacher, but they're not affiliated with the SHSAT in any way. They're just there to proctor it. So they're given a stack of basically booklets, and they come around the room, and they're even told how to walk, giving out tests. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So the person in front of you, on the sides, anyone here, will they have the same test as you? Not at all. Even if you want to glance at their paper, what might be, for example, if this is E and this person was F, what might be number 54 for them will be 57 for them. So if you copy them, you copy the wrong answer to the wrong question. Does everybody understand? That's how they prevent cheating. Now the question is, why the different difficulties in tests then, Mo? Isn't a little of this about luck? Yes, it is, unfortunately. I have always tried to figure out why they do that, and I've never been able to get a good answer. It's kind of the luck of the draw. If you're wondering, overwhelmingly, these are the tests that there are more of. There's already more forms of them, but these are what's mostly going around in circulation. Remember, there's 33,000 students taking the test, right? One of the ways, this is what I've heard from different people. I don't know, to me it doesn't make sense. This is one of the ways they kind of combat, like, for example, hard versus easy. Say, for example, take me, for example. When I was growing up, my father was a waiter. My mom was a homemaker. Immigrants, me, myself as included, I know for a fact we could never afford tutoring. So I kind of studied on my own. And so I don't have access to a lot of resources, right? There's levels of income and levels of opportunity. Other students can come to places for tutoring, maybe 10 bucks an hour, probably not as, extensive as Queller, but something. And then there are students who come to Queller, and then I know personally tutors and students whose families pay upwards to $250 an hour for like 1,000 hours of tutoring just for this test, for a guarantee, right? So there's levels to this, and for those reasons, that's trying to combat it. But to me, it doesn't make sense because it's not like I can't just go up to be like, you're rich, you must have gotten a lot of tutoring, you get a hard test, right? I'm just a very frank and blunt person, so that's not how it works. And so someone like me who could have come from a family where they might not have those kind of resources might as very well have gotten a hard test, right? And someone who could afford 1,000 hours at $250 per hour could get an easy test. So it's always the luck of the draw. The way I tutor and my philosophy behind teaching is, and I've had students do this, you're sick, you're running late, it's not your day. You take the test, you get into STI anyway, right? I've had a student call me 2 days before the test, Mo, I'm not feeling well, can I please take the makeup? Nope, you're not taking the makeup, you're taking the test in 2 days. Drink a lot of fluids, stay hydrated. If you don't feel like eating, that's fine. Drink a lot of fluids, stay hydrated, don't vomit, you'll be fine. Gets into Stuyvesant, 15 points over the cutoff. And that was a student I predicted would get in the 650s, 680s. Do you know what I mean? I know my students if they've been with me for that long. Why don't I want him to say, I'm going to take the 3 weeks, Mo, I'll be better prepared. The test is different, the test is harder. Until you finish with this test, guys and girls, it's like a backpack on your back that you carry around everywhere, right? You have to consistently worry about it, you have to consistently study for it, right? Parents, you care about your child's education, you schedule your lives according to when they're going to go to tutoring, when they're going to practice for this test, right? So to have to do that for 3 more weeks, especially when I knew the student was ready, I wasn't going to let them do it. Sure, if it's a student who's borderline, I would say, okay, take the 3 weeks, right? But you got to know your student, you got to know your child, you got to know where they're at, right? So don't think that if I have 3 more weeks, I might get a different test. Chances are you'll get a harder test, right? That test is different than these as well, right? So this is just information I'm here to, give to you. I don't control this. This is what I've known to be true for years. To my knowledge, it didn't change last year. To my knowledge, there's no reason for it to change this year. So that's the only reason I'm just giving you that information. For students, for kids who are studying for this test, don't worry about this. It's not there. Regardless of what test you get, right? Because at Queller, right, last summer and the summer before, I had made about 10 to 11 exams that we used for the summer camp. And one of my jobs for this upcoming summer is to also create new tests. My tests have always been kind of on the mark because I show my friend who works at the DOE what he thinks. And then he says, oh, could I borrow that? So I know that they're in good standing. We will give you all the varieties of the test, right? You will get hard versions, you'll get easy versions. But most of my tests fall under this category. Right, no, wrong, this category. Right between medium and hard. I'm not trying to scare you and bring your confidence down. I'm trying to keep you steady, right? It's exactly like that thing where you can't be too nervous because then you'll freeze, but you can't be too carefree because then you'll make silly mistakes, okay? Do I have any questions? Yeah. On the handout booklet, like what level is that? Yeah, that's the most common question. They're probably like right on medium or right below. I wouldn't categorize them as any of them over here. Does that make sense? Okay. Another thing parents often ask me is, at this point, where should my students be? Right? Or where should my child be? What should they be scoring? Remember how I said there's an order to the testing? You can't just get like a 90 out of 114. You have to get it a certain way, or you can't get 100 out of 114. You have to get it a certain way. I just talked about both of the topics, right? And the harder one to manage is math. When my students took the test last month, I wanted them all to get a 70 out of 114, and exactly in this way. In ELA, a 40, and in math, a 30 out of 57. And next month, when my students will take their last diagnostic, or rather in like 2 weeks, I want them to get an 85 out of 114, and a 45 in ELA, and a 40 in math. Right now, it's about being on a current, right? You're on a current to the destination. If you try to rush, you'll fall off, right? I always tell students this. Rather than a current, imagine it's a motorcycle. If you're not there yet, rev it up a little bit more, right? You got to put in a bit more work. You know who you are. You know your weaknesses. One of the worst things that students do, and I was guilty of this too when I was younger, is say, all right, Mom, I'll study. And I'll study for 3 hours. And as a parent, you're like, oh, that's wonderful. This is like having a new child. And so they'll go and they'll open their book and they'll study for 3 hours. Okay, 45 minutes went by. I'm thirsty by now. It's 45 minutes. I'm going to go drink some water. Oh, what's my brother doing? Okay, I got to get that water. Can't worry about him. Drinks water, goes back to the room. Okay. Great, 10 minutes went by. Okay, studies a little bit more, maybe another page or two. I drank water about 30 minutes ago. I probably need to use the bathroom. I'll be right back. Goes to the bathroom, right? I checked on my brother. I wonder what my mom's doing. Okay, yeah, Mom, I'm still studying. Goes back. And that 3 hours, right, has turned into 2 hours of going back and forth of stuff, right? Because you all get distracted. It's hard to stay focused. I was there once. So how do you alleviate that? This is what I tell students instead. Don't study for 3 hours. Give me 2 topics a day. Review 2 topics, right? In your notes, in the problems we give you, and those 2 topics, you decide. It could take you 3 hours, or it could take you 1 hour. Quality over quantity, right? That's always been kind of my mantra, right? If you study for a short amount of time, but you really utilize that time, you'll come off better than if you studied for 3 hours, but you've been goofing around for half of it. And the things will stick with you more as well, right? Studying is not kind of like a one-trick pony. It's different for everyone, and you need to kind of figure it out for you, right? That's one of the big things that I always say when they're studying. And going back to the motorcycle analogy, if my students are above this, I tell them keep the motor running. You don't want to turn it off, because if you turn it off and you try to restart it, the engine might stop. And you don't want that, right? You want to keep on going. We're still on the journey there. So that brings me to what's left, right? What happens after May? I know that we have summer camp here that's being offered, right? I know some people have made plans as families, right? That you're going to go away. It's hard to change plans. I would say that as much as it is hard to change plans, and if you're completely unable to, have a schedule. Figure out a way to study. I'm reasonable. I've made study schedules for students in the past who've gone away. And this is the way I've always done it. You have 1 day off in the week. That is to you. No SHSAT required, right? But the other days are packed, right? And you have to find time, not in one sitting, but throughout the day, twice or 3 times a day. Think of it as a meal, right? You got to eat twice or 3 times a day, right? So you got to study twice or 3 times a day. One of the worst things you can do for this test is stop practicing. Once you stop practicing, it's hard to get back in it, okay? And that's basically it. Questions? Studying while you listen to music? It's never worked, man. It's just never worked. I've tried it. People have different opinions about it. Classical music helps them relax. White noise, white static, doesn't work for me, right? I just kind of study through, right? If anything, I take breaks more intermittently. So if I'm studying for an hour, I'll set myself little goals, right? Okay, I got a full chapter to do. It's a long chapter. I'm going to study the first 10 pages. That could take me 30 minutes or it could take me 2 hours. I decide that. But once I have those 10 pages down, I'll take a break. And that's how you go, right? You can't try to rush it, right? Again, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Any other questions? Okay, well, it's been a pleasure. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Just trying to be cognizant of it. My name is Mo. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for being a part of Queller Prep. truth be told, Queens is the location I started off in. It's my favorite. But I got moved there because a lot of parents had signed up solely for me to be the tutor, so we got moved around. Yeah. I'm just there for now. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. It never hurts, right? But again, it's one of those things where if you stop for a little bit, you can lose it. It's the use it or lose it mentality. So if you could, I mean, one of the most frustrating things for students is like, oh, I've seen this before, but I don't know it now, right? So you could have that happen again, especially if they stop. I never would go against the advice of starting early. I think that if you start early, it doesn't need to be as intensive. That's what I would say. Consistent, yeah. Yes, ma'am. When I came in today, I didn't know it was being recorded. I'll be honest. So Miss Queller can definitely help you if she puts it up online. You can view it. Um, my advice, student to student, doesn't change. This is the same way I've been tutoring for 12 years, and it's the way I will continue to do so, I imagine. So yeah, it might be. I would talk to Miss Queller about that. Okay. Yes, sir. Sorry? So I actually did this in Manhattan a few weeks ago, and then this is actually the second time. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Am I gonna be here in the summer for the summer? Um, so my plans are in flux. I don't know yet. Um, I think they're running classes in Manhattan too. I'm not sure. Yeah, both locations. As of right now, I don't even know if I'm teaching in the summer, like in terms of classes. And even if I am, I don't know where I'm located. That's something. You have to understand. I I work about 100 to 110 hours a week between the three jobs. So whatever time I have, I let it be juiced out here. I don't mind. But there are days where my other schedules get in the way. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you all. Of course, if you have any other questions that you would like to personally ask me, feel free to. I'll be around for a few minutes. Okay. Have a great evening.